As long as it's on Facebook, people start believing it.
The idea that fake news on Facebook influenced the election in any way, I think, is a pretty crazy idea.
Fake news is affecting a number of countries on a number of different issues.
CBC News and the Toronto Star were given rare access to top-secret RCMP files of active investigations.
A big part of the job in doing investigations is to build the trust of sources. We had to hand over the story of our lives.
I'm Diana Swain. We're the investigators. This is what we do. Truth be told, getting at the truth is tough. Tonight, some examples of journalists digging deeper than ever to find it. The Oxford Dictionary recently revealed its word of the year is post-truth, an adjective meaning the facts don't really matter. But of course, we think they do. And the folks over at Facebook are finding out the hard way that lots of other people do too.
Nearly half of all U.S. news traffic originates from Facebook, and more people get their news from the site than any other source.
But Facebook's popularity is contributing to a big problem.
Pope Francis endorses Trump, a story shared nearly 100,000 times.
All of that forcing Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg to respond to claims that letting those stories stand may have affected the outcome of the vote.
Influence the election in any way, I think, is a pretty crazy idea.
As long as it's on Facebook and people can see it, as long as it's on social media, people start believing it.
What we know with viral stories is that once the truth comes out, even when they're verified, that verified version of the story never has the same reach as the original viral story.
A serious problem that's now dividing people who work at Facebook, according to BuzzFeed reporter Shira Frankel. This week, she revealed some Facebook employees have been meeting secretly to figure out how to put pressure on the company to crack down on fake news. Shira, why did people take the risk? In talking to you and meeting privately, they put their jobs at risk by doing it. So what do they think is really at stake with this fake news?
Well, I think that Facebook employees have not really spoken out as much as employees at other tech companies. And the fact that they did want to come forward and speak to me as well as meet secretly shows just how bad they think the problem has gotten. I think that the comments by Mark Zuckerberg over the weekend that it was a crazy idea that fake news had influenced the elections is what really sort of drove them over the edge and made them feel like they had to take a public stance on this.
And what do they think is at stake here, if not more is done?
Well, a lot of the employees I spoke to weren't so much talking about what happened in the elections that just passed here in the United States, but were looking forward to elections that are going to be facing Europe and the rest of the world in the coming year. They said that fake news is affecting a number of countries on a number of different issues, and they didn't want to see the mistakes made here in the United States over the past year replicated across the world, especially as Facebook is pushing right now to expand so heavily in the rest of the world.
So Facebook and Google have responded to this by saying, all right, we'll cut off the revenue stream for these fake news sites because that's really why they're there to make money. Is that going to be enough?
The employees I spoke to said they didn't think it was enough. I mean, stopping them from advertising is definitely a step, but it doesn't address sort of the key issue, which is that for as long as these are allowed to exist on the platform, and for as long as Facebook allows these essentially sites to run wild, people are going to click on them and people are going to share them. And in parts of the world with lower digital literacy, where people maybe have less of a healthy media climate of sources they can rely on, people are going to believe those fake news items and make judgments based on what they read there.
One of the guys who's really the leader of these fake news sites, who actually a number of them are under his name, has expressed surprise now that he might have contributed to anything in terms of the outcome of the election. But he says, hey, look, I make money doing this, and is it really my fault if people don't fact check? They don't bring any critical thinking to these stories, some of which even he admits are pretty fantastic.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we've seen BuzzFeed did a report looking at Macedonian teenagers who are running some of these sites. So it's not always that they're being done maliciously, that there's a political intent. I mean, of course, some of them are. Some of them are put up to support one candidate over another. But a lot of the time, it's just people trying to make money. And I think what's interesting is that so many of them have kind of, not just this guy, but also somebody in the Washington Post also sort of wrote and said, I can't believe people bought that. I can't believe people shared that article as widely as they did. And so I think there's a certain amount of sort of incredulity that people believe everything they see online.
Shira, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Think you can spot a fake? Here are 4 headlines circulating online. Can you tell which 2 aren't true? Woman changes her name to Donald Trump. Next Star Wars movie to be filmed near Kingston. Hundreds of extras needed. Breaking Bad. Sheep kills man, aged 94. Or FBI agent suspected in Hillary email leaks found dead in apparent murder-suicide. Think you know? You can tweet me at Swain Diana, and we'll separate the fact from fiction near the end of the show. The work of investigating real stories is, of course, far more arduous. Here's a good example. Journalists trying to dig into the work of police and intelligence services often run into a veil of secrecy, but occasionally that veil is lifted.
CBC News and the Toronto Star were given rare access to top-secret RCMP files.
The CBC's Dave Seglins and Rob Cribb of the Toronto Star were permitted to see summaries of 10 active investigations, which the RCMP says are being hampered by criminals hiding behind a screen of technology.
For instance, Eastern Canada 2014, police got warrants to monitor a group of terrorism suspects, but a problem. The internet service provider didn't have the technical capability to do the job.
The RCMP wants expanded powers to break encryption codes or obtain passwords to help in their investigations, arguing they need that to just keep pace with terrorists, child predators, and others who use digital technology to hide their tracks. But many others say police already have the tools they need, and what's being proposed now goes too far. A contrary view the force is keenly aware of.
Because we're proposing some sort of amendment to our powers, I often get dismissed as a troglodyte that doesn't understand people's privacy.
So, about that access, how should reporters balance a rare chance to see inside those investigations with the worry they're also playing into a public relations campaign? So, Rob, let me start with you. You know what some of the criticisms were, because they came out right away. People said, hey, they cherry-picked the cases, the RCMP did, to best illustrate their argument. So what do you say?
This is one of those stories where you enter into a very difficult decision. So this is a matter of vital public interest. It's a debate where we've heard vigorously from one side. The other side has not come to the table. I've been working on this issue for a year and a half, asking for evidence from the police, and they just have never given it. So we worked on them and we pushed them on this, and ultimately we said we want to see it, and they said, well, here's the deal. And so it's a difficult decision. These issues come up often when it's often an argument when journalists embed overseas in conflict zones. It's the same argument. At what point do you agree to the terms and conditions, and what point do you walk away? In this case, we decided that the issue is so important that the debate was happening right now. And the Canadians really only had one side of that debate, and we needed to provide them with the other side.
Okay, so Dave, you've got this material now. How do you look at it critically and say, all right, I know that they've picked cases that illustrate their point, but how do I pull the journalism out of this?
Well, we looked at all of the case examples. There were case summaries, fairly detailed. We had background briefings where we could ask some questions. But we are limited in what we understand of these cases, and I think we reflect that to the public in the way we report it. We say that there are limits on what we can understand. You have to understand, we're talking about national security cases, and yes, there's a risk of falling into the public relations campaign, but the alternative is not having any discussion of what it looks like for police on the front lines when they're hitting these digital roadblocks. And I think the benefit and the reasons we make the decision, okay, there are limits to this, we're going to go and do this journalistically, is we can put it out to the public can hold this up to the light as well, and we can have a more informed public debate, because the public needs more information. That's always been the claim. We need evidence, we need more information to inform making these big decisions on how we're going to change laws that affect privacy. This is better than not having the information.
With no small amount of irony, you guys actually had to give up your own privacy to do a story about privacy. So tell me a bit about that process.
So it's weird. A big part of the job in doing investigations is to build the trust of sources so that they'll talk to you. In this case, it was extraordinary because we had to undergo this incredibly intrusive process where we had to hand over the story of our lives, really. So everywhere we've worked, every place we've lived, every address, family members, criminal background checks, friends, family. The
police insisted on this from you guys before they'd show you what they had.
Yeah, it's a security clearance that we had, what they call the top secret security clearance that we had to pass in order to have a look at these top secret documents.
So what were they looking for?
Well, they ask banking information, kinds of salaries. They look for personal references, people who've known you for a long time, and then they follow up and conduct interviews. This is part of a federal screening process, so anybody in the federal government that has a top secret security clearance has gone through this. CSIS takes a look and reviews. I asked, why do we need this? We're just journalists showing up to look at a few things. The response is that, look, number one, they need to develop a trust factor. They have to understand it, and they have to go through a protocol. They need to know, for instance, on the financial front, that I'm not heavily indebted, that I'm not owing to the mob or something, that I can be manipulated to get access to then trade on the information and the trust that, that they're sharing and extending to us, that we're not somehow compromised before we begin the journalistic work.
So there's more I want to talk to you two about, so stay here for just a second. So what brought these two reporters who work in different media and different newsrooms together? And how does that serve their audience? We'll dig into that. Plus,
being on the internet is not a high bar for accuracy.
Fake news is getting called out by fake news anchors. But could all this fakery be good news for real news? My POV later. But first.
Hey, that's my line. No, Kent Brockman won't be taking over as host of The Investigators. But the Simpsons do deserve a shout-out for doing something that few journalists were able to do, predict a Donald Trump presidency 16 years ago.
As you know, we've inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump. How bad is it, Secretary Van Houten?
We're broke. That scene has gotten a lot of attention since Trump's big win. The producers even mocked their own clairvoyance during this week's episode, with Bart Simpson writing, "Being right sucks." So how do the soothsayers of Springfield think the Trump presidency will go?
The Chinese fleet is advancing. Just build another wall. Yes, in the ocean, loser.
Here are 5 things we learned this week from investigative journalists. Metro News finds a gender gap on the boards of federal crown corporations. Only 34% of appointees are women. The giant Christmas tree that Nova Scotia sends to Boston every year comes with a pretty big price tag. CBC Nova Scotia learned it cost the province $242,000 last year, including money for broadcasters in Canada and the U.S. An investigation into the 1978 death of Hogan's Heroes star Bob Crane finds evidence that vindicates one of the case's main suspects. A Fox TV anchor had police retest DNA found on the suspect's car. The Intercept finds evidence that shows a mysterious windowless skyscraper in New York is likely a major NSA surveillance site. Its codename, Titan Point. And the Fifth Estate uncovers new information in the cold case of Reet Jurvetson, a young Montreal woman murdered in Los Angeles 47 years ago.
We've been talking with the CBC's Dave Seglins and the Toronto Star's Rob Cribb about their recent joint investigation, looking at the RCMP's interest in getting greater powers to look at Canadians' digital background. But how is it that two reporters working for different news organizations and different media came to be working together?
Journalistic co-productions, or co-pros in industry speak, are becoming more common. Newsrooms pooling their resources to cover major stories, popularized this year by the Panama Papers.
The largest ever document leak is giving us an unprecedented look inside offshore tax havens.
The release of 11 million financial and legal documents, exposing how the rich and powerful hide their wealth. The story quickly had global impact.
The Icelandic Prime Minister, Mr. Gunnlaugsson, has now stood down.
The hard work done not by one reporter or news outlet, but by 400 journalists from 100 news organizations around the world, including the CBC. A dramatic example of cooperation. But what's gained for journalists, and does it always serve the audience?
So let's start with what journalists get out of this, because, in some circumstances, we're elbows up, right? I want the story before you get it. So why work together?
The main reason is 2 or 3 brains are better than one. But also, we both arrived at the doorstep of the RCMP asking for evidence, asking for access. roughly at the same time. So if we were in competition and one of us got the access or we were given partial access, we'd be racing to air. So you get time and you're putting your brains together. But I'd also say we're sharing all manner of resources in this, and then we are getting an editorial product that we have more time to shape, and then we're reaching the audiences of Canada's largest national newspaper and the public broadcaster. So it's got all sorts of benefits in terms of the journalism that gets done and the audience that gets reached.
But the rub of that, as you talk about the size of these journalistic organizations, is when we hear about media concentration, this is one less voice then talking about this story because you got two coming from the same perspective. Is there a danger in that?
No, I really don't think so. I think on daily news, on the news of the day, we're still very competitive. The Toronto Star wants to kill the CBC every day. It's what we're talking about here. Co-productions are really a very narrow, slim part of what we do. It's the big stories. It's the investigations. It's the large public interest stories where they are so resource intensive. There are so many hours that go into these things. And to be able to combine the resources of the biggest broadcaster, the biggest newspaper, more brain power, more cross-promotion, when that lands simultaneously, it can really seize the agenda, and it can seize attention of politicians, it can seize attention of Canadians in a way that doing it individually might not. And for me, the great benefit, and this is almost all I do now, we have a team at the Toronto Star that focuses on co-productions. Like, we have made this part of our mandate, and for me, it's all about the quality of it. We can do more ambitious journalism. You can do journalism with wider scope and with greater resources than we could ever do individually.
Thanks to both of you for talking about this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
He never said that. It's not true.
Separating fact from fiction. We asked if you can tell the difference. The answers and my POV straight ahead. Plus,
how the CBC chooses the stories that they want to pursue an investigation on.
Your chance to ask me anything about investigative journalism. I'll try to answer next. First, investigators on assignment. Here's David Common working on next week's Marketplace.
So, marijuana is going to become legal in Canada, but we're not in Canada, we're in Colorado, because this was the first jurisdiction in North America to legalize it, and we wanted to know some of the things they learned through that process. That's brought us inside this room, where we're doing an experiment. We've asked a few volunteers to come in, people who have smoked marijuana in the past to varying degrees. We've got one man up here right now, and he's actually a regular user. How you doing, Samuel? So 4 or 5 times a week, and we wanted to know a bit about what that might do to someone's brain. It's why you see these measurements going on here in the background. This gives us an indication of what's happening with Samuel's brain activity. Now, there are people, of course, we need to be able to figure that out. We brought in some people who are experts at tracking brain activity, and a cognitive neuroscientist who's actually spent a lot of time studying this issue, looking at things like what kind of issues can happen to people who are susceptible perhaps to mood disorders. Those are the key things that we'll be watching out for.
Every week, we invite you to ask me anything about investigative journalism. So this week, Alexandra has taken up that challenge and has a question for me. What would you like to know?
Diana, I'm just wondering how the CBC chooses the stories that they want to pursue an investigation on.
It's tough sometimes because, we all have ideas and we'll sit around as a group and discuss them. But for me, personally, there are 3 things that I think help decide which ones we should go ahead on. So the first one would be, does it surprise me? I sort of joke and say, tell me something I don't know. An investigative story isn't all that interesting if it tells me something I already presumed to be the case and now you're just proving it. I want to be surprised. I think the stories need to be meaningful to more than one person or a group of people because your audience is wider than that. And you can use one person as an example, but it has to resonate with a lot of people for people to care about it. And that's the other thing is it something we need to know? It's pretty easy to find a document somewhere that tells people things they don't all that much care about. It has to be important, especially because there's a lot of work that goes into investigative journalism. So that's kind of how we decide, but it's never one person who decides. It's a group. Investigative journalism is really about teamwork. And so sometimes we have some pretty passionate debates, but eventually we decide.
Interesting. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for your question.
Thanks.
Bye. Okay, at the beginning of the program, I asked if you could spot which of these headlines circulating online are fake. Woman changing her name to Donald Trump. Next Star Wars movie to be filmed near Kingston. Hundreds of extras needed. Breaking Bad. Sheep kills man aged 94. And FBI agent suspected in Hillary email leaks found dead in apparent murder-suicide. The truth? A woman really is changing her name to Donald Trump. And yes, that sheep is a killer. The other two, totally fake. There was a time not that long ago when fake news was easy to spot. Some personal favorites include Google Street View's Heaven, and the planet Saturn is a giant UFO. Fake news for years lived in one place, on the checkout rack at the grocery store. It was fun to read and it made us laugh. But Facebook, from which a staggering number of people now get their news, works on the formula that whatever gets the most clicks can earn the person who posts it a lot of money. And when people making a lot of money caught the attention of people with strong political views, a marriage in fakery was made. And suddenly, it was a lot harder to tell fact from fiction. With convincing-looking graphics and websites that appeared to be the real deal, but weren't. Facebook, now tacitly acknowledging it might want to police this a little bit, has announced it won't let fake news sites generate revenue there anymore, which is great, but U.S. satirist Stephen Colbert's reaction kind of sums up ours.
As of today, Facebook will restrict these fake news sites. Now they're going to restrict them. Also, while we're at it, let me just close these barn doors so those stupid cows can't get back in. Enjoy your field, stupid cow.
Who really knows how many people voted the way they did because they believed something that was false? But as it becomes increasingly clear, there's a lot of this stuff out there. More than ever, people want to know they can believe what they read and hear. Say what you will about the faults of the media, but the rise of fake news may be the best thing to happen to real journalism in a long time. And that makes this a good news story. I'm Diana Swain. This is The Investigators.